Hello and welcome. My name is Alan. Today we'll be reading more from A Testament of Hope, the writings and speeches of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The piece we're going to read today is called Black Power Defined. Blur reads, the following article is a synopsis of King's understanding of the new wave of African American nationalism then being embraced by many within the Black community. His book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, New York, Harper and Row, 1967, contains a more expanded discussion of this movement. Dr. King embraced the basic political and social agenda of Black power advocates, but strongly condemned their endorsement of revolutionary violence and Black separatism. When a people are mired in oppression, they realize deliverance only when they have accomplished the power to enforce change. The powerful never lose opportunities. They remain reliable to them. The powerless, on the other hand, never experience opportunity. It is always arriving at a later time. The nettlesome task of Negroes today is to discover how to organize our strength into compelling power so that the government cannot elude our demands. We must develop from strength a situation in which the government finds it wise and prudent to collaborate with us. It would be the height of naivety to wait passively until the administration has somehow been infused with such blessings of goodwill that it implored us for our programs. We must frankly acknowledge that in the past years our creativity and imagination were not employed in learning how to develop power. We found a method in nonviolent protest that worked, and we employed it enthusiastically. We did not have leisure to probe for the deeper understanding of its laws and lines of development. Although our actions were bold and crowned with successes, they were substantially improvised and spontaneous. They attained the goals set for them, but carried the blemishes of our inexperience. This is where the civil rights movement stands today. Now we must take the next major step of examining the levers of power which Negroes must grasp to influence the course of events. In our society, power sources can always finally be traced to ideological, economic, and political forces. In the area of ideology, despite the impact of the works of a few Negro writers and a limited number of white intellectuals, all too few Negro thinkers have exerted an influence on the main currents of American thought. Nevertheless, Negroes have illuminated imperfections in the democratic structure that were formerly only dimly perceived and have forced a concentrated re-examination of the true meaning of American democracy. As a consequence of the vigorous Negro protests, the whole nation has for a decade probed more searchingly the essential nature of democracy, both economic and political, by taking to the streets and there giving practical lessons in democracy and its defaults. Negroes have decisively influenced white thought. Lacking the sufficient access to television, publications, and broad forums, Negroes have had to write their most persuasive essays with a blunt pen of marching ranks. The many white political leaders and well meaning friends who ask Negro leadership to lead the streets may not realize that they are asking us effectively to silence ourselves. More white people learn more about the shame of America and finally faced some aspects of it during the years of nonviolent protests than during the century before. Nonviolent direct action will continue to be a significant source of power until it is made irrelevant by the presence of justice. The economic highway to power has few entry lanes for Negroes. Nothing so vividly reveals the crushing impact of discrimination and the heritage of exclusion as the limited dimensions of Negro business in the most powerful economy in the world. America's industrial production is half the world's total, and within it, the production of Negro business is so small that it can scarcely be measured on any definable scale. Not in relation to the Negro community, the value of Negro businesses should not be underestimated. In the internal life of the Negro society, it provides a degree of stability. Despite formidable obstacles, it has developed a core of men of competence and organizational discipline who constitute a talented leadership reserve, whose who furnish inspiration and who are a resource for the development of programs and planning. They are a strength among the weak, though they are weak among the mighty. There are two other areas, however, where Negroes can exert substantial influence on the broader economy as employees and consumers. Negro numbers and their strategic disposition endow them with a certain bargaining strength. Within the ranks of the organized labor, there are nearly 2 million Negroes, and they are concentrated in key industries. In the truck, transportation, steel, auto, and food industries, which are the backbone of the nation's economic life. Negroes make up nearly 20% of the organized workforce, although they are only 10% of the general population. This potential strength is magnified further by the fact that their unity with millions of white workers in these occupations. As co workers, there is a basic community of interest that transcends many of the ugly, decisive elements of traditional prejudice. There are undeniably points of friction, for example, in certain housing and education questions. But for the severity of the abrasions is minimized by the more commanding need for cohesion to union organizations. The union record in relation to Negro workers is exceedingly uneven. That potential for influencing union decisions still exists. In many of the larger unions, the white leadership maintains some men of ideas, and many more who are pragmatists. Both groups find they are benefited by the constructive relationship to their Negro membership. For those compelling reasons, Negroes are who are almost wholly a working people cannot be casual toward the union movement. This is true even though some unions remain uncontestably hostile. In days to come, organized labor will increase its importance to the destinies of Negroes. Negroes pressed into the proliferating service occupations, traditionally unorganized and with low wages and long hours, and union protect needs union protection, and the union movement needs their membership to maintain its relative strength in the whole society. In this new frontier, Negroes may well become the pioneers that they were in the early organizing days of the 30s. To play our role fully as Negroes, we will also have to strive for enhanced representation and influence in the labor movement. Our young people need to think of union careers as earnestly as they do of business careers and professions. They could do worse than emulate A. Philip Randolph, who rose to the executive council of the AFL CIO and became a symbol of the courage, compassion, and integrity of the enlightened labor leader. Indeed, the questions may be asked why we have produced only one Randolph in nearly half a century. Discrimination is not the whole answer. We allowed ourselves to accept middle class prejudices against the labor movement. Yet, this is one of those fields in which higher education is not a requirement for high office. In shunning it, we have lost an opportunity. Let us try to regain it now, at a time when the joint forces of Negroes and labor may be facing a historic task of social reform. The other economic lever available to the Negro is as a consumer. The Southern Christian Leadership Council has pioneered in developing mass boycott movements in a frontal attack on discrimination. In Birmingham, it was not the marching alone that brought about the integration of public facilities in 1963. The downtown business establishments suffered for weeks under our almost unbelievably effective boycotts. The significant percentage of their sales that vanished, the 98% of their Negro customers who stayed home, educated them forcefully to the dignity of the Negro as a consumer. Later, we crystallized our experiences in Birmingham and elsewhere and developed a department in SCLC called Operation Breadbasket. This has the primary aim of securing of more and better jobs for the Negro people. It calls on the Negro community to support those businesses that will give a fair share of jobs to Negroes and to withdraw its support from those businesses that have discriminatory policies. Operation Breadbasket is carried out mainly by clergymen. First, a team of ministers calls on the management of a business in the community to request basic facts on the company's total number of employees. the number of Negro employees, the department or job classifications in which all employees are located, and the salary ranges for each category. The team then returns to the steering committee to evaluate the data and to make a recommendation concerning the number of new and upgraded jobs that should be requested. Then the team transmits the request to a management to hire or upgrade a specified number of qualifiable Negroes within a reasonable period of time. If negotiations on this request break down, the step of real power and pressure is taken, a massive call for economic withdrawal from the company's product and the accompanying demonstrations if necessary. At present, SCLC has Operation Breadbasket functioning in some 12 cities, and the result has been remarkable. In Atlanta, for instance, the Negro's earning power has been increased by more than $20 million annually over the past 3 years through a carefully disciplined program of selective buying and negotiation by the Negro ministers. During the last 8 months in Chicago, Operation Breadbasket successfully completed negotiations with the three major industries: milk, soft drinks, and chain grocery stores. Four of the companies involved included fashionable agreements only after short "don't buy" campaigns. Seven other companies were able to make the requested changes across the conference table without necessitating a boycott. Two other companies, after providing their employment information to the ministers, were sent letters of commendation for their healthy equal employment practices. The net results add up to approximately 800 new and upgraded jobs for Negro employees, worth a little over $7 million in new annual income for Negro families. In Chicago, we have recently added a new dimension to Operation Breadbasket. Along with the requesting new job opportunities, we are now requesting that businesses with stores in the ghetto deposit the income for their establishments in Negro owned banks, and that Negro owned products be placed on the counters of all their stores. In a way, we seek to stop the drain of resources out of the ghetto with nothing remaining there for its rehabilitation. The final major area of untapped power for the Negro is the political arena. Higher Negro birth rates and increasing Negro migration, along with the exodus of the white population to the suburbs, are producing fast gathering Negro majorities in the large cities. This changing composition of the cities has political significance, particularly in the North. The large cities substantially determine the political destiny of the state. These states, in turn, hold the dominating electoral votes in presidential contests. The future of the Democratic Party, which rests so heavily on its coalition of urban minorities, cannot be assessed without taking into account which way the Negro vote turns. The wistful hopes of the Republican Party for large city influence will also be decided not in the boardrooms of great corporations, but in the teeming ghettos. The growing Negro vote in the South is another source of power, as it weakens and enfeebles the Dixiecrats. By concentrating its blows against them, it undermines the congressional coalition of Southern reactionaries and their Northern Republican colleagues. That coalition, which has always exercised a disproportionate power in Congress by controlling the major committees, will lose its ability to frustrate measures of social advancement and to impose its perverted definition of democracy on the political thought of the nation. The Negro vote at present is only a partially realized strength. It can still be doubled in the South. In the North, even when the Negroes are registered in equal proportion to whites, they do not vote in the same proportions. Assailed by a sense of futility, Negroes resist participating in empty ritual. However, when the Negro citizen learns that united and organized pressure can achieve measurable results, he will make his influence felt. Out of the conscious act, the political power of the aroused minority will be enhanced and consolidated. We have many assets to facilitate organization. Negroes are almost instinctively cohesive. We band together readily and against white hostility. We have an intense and wholesome loyalty to each other. We are acutely conscious of the need, the sharply sensitive to the importance of defending our own. Solidarity in a reality in Negro life as it always has been among the oppressed. On the other hand, Negroes are capable of becoming competitive, carping, and in an expression of self hate, suspicious and intolerant of each other. A glaring weakness in Negro life is the lack of sufficient mutual confidence and trust. Negro leaders suffer from this interplay of solidarity and divisiveness, being either exalted excessively or grossly abused. Some of those leaders suffer from the aloofness and absence of faith in their people. The white establishment is skilled in flattering and cultivating emerging leaders. It presses its own image on them, and finally, from the initiation of manners, dress, and style of living, a deeper strain of disruption develops. This kind of Negro leader acquires the white man's contempt for the ordinary Negro. He is often more at home with the middle class white than he is among his own people. His language changes, his location changes, his income changes, and ultimately he changes from the representative of the Negro to the white man into the white man's representative to the Negro. The tragedy is too often he does not recognize what has happened to him. I learned a lesson many years ago from a report of two men who flew to Atlanta to confer with a Negro civil rights leader. At the airport, before they could begin to talk, the porter sweeping the floor drew the local leader aside to talk about a matter that troubled him. After 15 minutes had passed, one of the visitors said bitterly to his companion, "I am just too busy for this kind of nonsense. I haven't come 1,000 miles to sit and wait while he talks to a porter. The other replied, when the day comes that he stops having time to talk to a porter, on that day I will not have the time to come 1 mile to see him. We need organization that permeated with mutual trust, incorruptibly incorruptibility and militancy. Without this spirit, we may have the numbers, but we will add up to zero. We need organizations that are responsible, efficient, and alert. We lack experience because ours is a history of disorganization. But we will prevail because our need for progress is stronger than the ignorance forced upon us. If we realize how indispensable is responsible militant organization to our struggle, we will create it as we manage to create underground railroads, protest groups, self help societies, and the churches that we have always been our refuge, our source of hope, and our source of action. Negroes have been slow to organize because they have been traditionally manipulated. The political powers take advantage of the three major weaknesses: the manner in which our political leaders emerge, our failure so far to achieve effective political alliances, and the Negro's general reluctance to participate fully in political life. The majority of Negro political leaders do not ascend to prominence on the shoulders of mass support. Although genuinely popular leaders are now emerging, most are still selected by white leadership, elevated to positions, supplied with resources, and inevitably subjected to white control. The mass of Negroes nurtures a healthy suspicion toward this manufactured leader, who spends little time in persuading them that he embodies personal integrity, commitment, and ability, and offers few programs and less service. Tragically, he is in too many respects not a fighter for a new life, but a figurehead of the old one. Hence, very few Negro political leaders are impressive or illustrious to their constituents. They enjoy only limited loyalty and qualified support. This relationship, in turn, hampers the Negro leader in bargaining with genuine strength and independent firmness with white party leaders. The whites are all too well aware of his importance and his remoteness from his constituents, and they deal with him as a powerless subordinate. He is accorded a measure of dignity and personal respect, but not political power. The Negro politician, therefore, finds himself in a vacuum. He has no base in either direction on which to build influence and attain leverage. In two national polls among Negroes, to name the most respected leaders out of the highest 15, only a single political figure, Congressman Adam Clayton Powell, was included, and he was in the lower half of both lists. This is in marked contrast to polls in which white people choose their most popular leaders. Political personalities are always high on the lists and are represented in goodly numbers. There is no Negro personality evoking affection, respect, and emulation to correspond to JFK, Eleanor Roosevelt, Herbert Lehman, Earl Warren, and Adlai Stevenson, to name but a few. The circumstances in which Congressman Powell emerged into leadership and the experiences of his career are unique. It would not shed light on the larger picture to attempt to study the very individual factors that apply to him. It is fair to say no other Negro political leader is similar, either in the strengths he possesses, the power he attained, or the errors he has committed. And so we shall have to create leaders who embody virtues we can respect, who have moral and ethical principles which we can applaud with an enthusiasm that enables us to rally support for them based on the confidence and trust. We will have to demand high standards and give consistent, loyal support to those who merit it. We will have to be a reliable constituency for those who prove themselves to be committed political warriors in our behalf. When our movement has partisan political personalities, those unity whose unity with their people is unshakable and whose independence is genuine, they will be treated in white political councils with the respect those who embody such power deserve. In addition to the development of genuinely independent and representative political leaders, we shall have to master the art of political alliances. Negroes should be natural allies of many white reform and independent political groups, yet there are more commonly organized and old line machine politicians. We will have to learn to refuse crumbs from the big city machines and steadfastly demand a fair share of the loaf. When the machine politicians demur, we must be prepared to act in unity and throw our support to such independent parties or reform wings of the major parties as are prepared to take our demands serious and fight for them vigorously. The art of alliance politics is more complex and more intricate than is generally pictured. It is easy to put exciting combinations on paper. It evokes happy memories to recall that our victories in the past decade were won with a broad coalition of organizations representing a wide variety of interests. But we deceive ourselves if we envision the same combination making structural changes in the society. It did not come together for such a program, and it will not reassemble for it. A true alliance is based upon some self interest of each component group and the common interest into which they merge. For an alliance to have permanence and loyal commitment from its various elements, each of them must have a goal from which it benefits and no one and none must have an outlook in basic conflict with the others. If we employ the principle of selectivity among these lines, it will fund millions of allies who, in serving themselves, also support us. And on such sound foundations, unity and mutual trust and tangible accomplishment will flourish. In the changing traditions of the South, we will find alliances increasingly instrumental in political progress. For a number of years, there were de facto alliances in some states in which Negroes voted for the same candidate as whites because he had shifted from a racist to a moderate politician, even though he did not articulate an appeal for Negro votes. In recent years, the transformation has accelerated, and many white candidates have entered alliances publicly as they perceived that the Negro vote was becoming a substantial and permanent factor. They could not remain aloof from it. More and more competition will develop among white political forces, such as a significant block of voters and a monolithic white unity based on racism will no longer be possible. Racism is a tenacious evil, but it is not immutable. Millions of underprivileged whites are in the process of considering the contradiction between segregation and economic progress. White supremacy can feed their egos, but not their stomachs. They will not go hungry or forego the affluent society to remain racially ascendant. Governors Wallace and Maddox, whose credentials as racists are impeccable, understand this, and for that reason, they represent themselves as liberal populists as well. Temporarily, they can carry water on both shoulders, but the ground is becoming unsteady beneath their feet. Each of them has fared or faced in the primary last year with a new breed of white Southerner who, for the first time in history, met with Negro organizational demagogy. These new figures won significant numbers of white votes, insufficient for victory, but sufficient to point the future direction of the South. It is true that the Negro vote has not transformed the North, but the fact that Northern alliances and political action generally have been poorly executed is no reason to predict that the negative experiences will be automatically extended in the North or duplicated in the South. The Northern Negro has never used direct action as a mass scale for reforms, and anyone who predicted 10 years ago that the Southern Negro would also neglect it would have dramatically been proved in error. Everything Negroes need will not, like magic, materialize from the use of the ballot. Yet, as a lever of power, if it is given studious attention and employed with the creativity we have proved through the protest activity we possess, it will help to achieve many far reaching changes during our lifetimes. The final reason for our dearth of political strength, particularly in the North, arises from the grip of an old tradition on many individual Negroes. They tend to hold themselves aloof from politics as a serious concern. They sense that they are manipulated, and their defense is a cynical disinterest to safeguard themselves from, on this front, from the exploitation that torments them in so many areas. They shut the door to political activity and retreat into the dark shadows and passivity. Their sense of futility is deep, and in terms of their bitter experiences, it is justified. They cannot perceive political action as a source of power. It will take patient and persistent effort to eradicate this mood. But the new consciousness of strength developed in a decade of stirring agitation can be utilized to channel constructive Negro activity into political life and illuminate the stagnation produced by an outdated and defensive paralysis. In the future, we must become intensive political activists. We must be guided in this direction because we need political strength more desperately than any other group in American society. Most of us are too poor to have adequate economic power, and many of us are too rejected by the culture to be part of any tradition of power. Necessity will draw us toward the power inherent in the creative uses of politics. Negroes nurture a persisting myth that the Jews of America attained social mobility and status solely because they had money. It is unwise to ignore the error for many reasons. In a negative sense, it encourages anti Semitism and overestimates money as a value. In a positive sense, the full truth reveals a useful lesson. Jews progressed because they possessed a tradition of education combined with social and political action. The Jewish family enthroned education and sacrifice to get it. The result was far more than abstract learning, uniting social action with educational competence. Jews became enormously effective in political life. Those Jews who became lawyers, businessmen, writers, entertainers, union leaders, and medical men did not vanish into the pursuits of their trade exclusively. They lived an active life in political circles, learning the techniques and arts of politics. Nor was it only the rich who were involved in the social and political action. Millions of Jews for half of a century remained relatively poor, but they were far from passive in social and political areas. They lived in homes in which politics was a household word. They were deeply involved in radical parties, liberal parties, and conservative parties. They formed many of them. Very few Jews sank into despair and escapism, even when discrimination assailed the spirit and corroded initiative. Their life raft in the sea of discouragement was social action. Without overlooking the towering differences between the Negro and Jewish experiences, the lesson of Jewish mass involvement in social and political action and education is worthy of emulation. Negroes have already started on this road in creating the protest movement. But this is only a beginning. We must involve everyone we can reach, even those with inadequate education, and together acquire political sophistication by discussion, practice, and reading. The many thousands of Negroes who have already found intellectual growth and spiritual fulfillment on this path know its creative possibilities. They are not among the legions of the lost. They are not crushed by the weight of centuries. Most heartening, among the young, the spirit of challenge and determination for change is becoming our unquenchable force. But the scope of struggle is still too narrow and too restricted. We must turn more of our energies and focus our creativity on the useful things that translate into power. We in this generation must do the work, and in doing it, stimulate our children to learn and acquire higher levels of skill and technique. It must become a crusade so vital that civil rights organizers do not repeatedly have to make personal calls to summon support. There must be a climate of social pressure in the Negro community that scorns the Negro who will not pick up his citizenship rights and add his strength enthusiastically and voluntarily to the accumulation of power for himself and his people. The past years have blown fresh winds through ghetto stagnation, but we are on the threshold of a significant change that demands a hundredfold acceleration. By 1970, 10 of our larger cities will have Negro majorities if present trends continue. We can shrug off this opportunity or use it for a new vitality to deepen and enrich our family and community life. We must utilize the community's action groups and training centers now proliferating in some slum areas to create not merely an electorate, but a conscious, alert, and informed people who know that their direction and whose collective wisdom and vitality commands respect. The slave heritage can be cast into the dim past by our consciousness of our strengths and a resolute determination to use them in our daily experiences. Power is not the white man's birthright. It will not be legislated for us and delivered in neat government packages. It is a social force any group can utilize by accumulating its elements on a planned, deliberate campaign to organize it under its own control. Published in the New York Times Magazine in 1967. So, yeah, Dr. King talking about organizing and uniting to help provide a better way forward. He talked about unions. He talked about um, taking political action, social action, even, how the Jews set the road for them. But yeah, that's going to be it for now. I'll see you, as always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next episode. Until then, later.